Have you ever felt a quiet disconnect in your family? A sense that some emotions just aren't talked about? This week on Not So Perfect, we're diving deep into the silent generation's profound legacy. They lived through the Great Depression, World War II, an era that demanded stoicism and self reliance. But what happens when generations are taught to keep calm and carry on above all else? We'll explore how this created an unspoken code of emotional repression, subtly shaping family dynamics for decades. Discover how these inherited patterns can silently impact your intimacy and emotional regulation today. It's time to understand the echoes of the past so we can heal our present. Stay with us. Hey, welcome to Not So Perfect, the podcast that honors the beauty in our flaws and the wisdom in our struggles. I'm your host, Jessica Flower, and each week we delve into the patterns that shape us, awakening the power to live with greater awareness, compassion, and truth. By sharing our lived experiences, increasing our self awareness, and embracing our humanity, we aim to elevate the collective consciousness and invite healing, growth, and connection. This week, we're shining a light on an unspoken influence on many of our lives, the emotional legacy of the silent generation. Think about your grandparents, great grandparents, or perhaps older relatives. Do they seem stoic, private, maybe a little emotionally distant? There's often a reason for that rooted deeply in their formative years. Today, we're exploring the silent generation's scars, emotional regression, and its legacy. How the post World War II emphasis on stoicism and self reliance impacted emotional expression within families, and how this can manifest as difficulty with intimacy or emotional regulation in us, their descendants. The silent generation, typically born between 1928 and 1945, lived through an incredible period of upheaval. They were children of the Great Depression, witnessing profound scarcity and hardship. They came of age during World War II and the Korean War, facing a world demanding immense sacrifice and resilience. When the wars ended, the prevailing message wasn't process your trauma, it was rebuild, recover, and keep calm and carry on. This created a crucible of silence. Society rewarded strength, self sufficiency, and emotional restraint. There was an emphasis on work ethic and a drive for economic prosperity that often overshadowed emotional needs. For men, being a strong, silent provider was the ideal. Showing fear or sadness was often seen as weakness. For women, the focus was on creating a stable home, often at the expense of their own emotional needs. This wasn't about malice, it was about survival. Emotional expression was simply not prioritized. It was even seen as counterproductive to the immense tasks at hand. You had to tough it out, and if you had feelings that got in the way, you buried them. There were some key influences to this. There was the good soldier mentality. For those who served, the military culture reinforced emotional suppression as a survival mechanism. Even for those who didn't serve, this ethos permeated through society. And there was a lack of psychological understanding. In the nascent state of psychology and therapy, mental health issues were often stigmatized or not recognized. Suck it up was the default advice. This cultural mandate of stoicism didn't just float in the air, it seeped into the very fabric of family life. In turn, these individuals often raise the next generation with the same unspoken code of Don't make a fuss. Don't complain. Just get on with it. There was often a lack of emotional vocabulary, not because they didn't care, but because they simply hadn't been taught it themselves. Affection might be shown through actions, a warm meal, a fixed car, a clean house, rather than through words of affirmation or open emotional connection. So, what happens when a generation learns to repress rather than express their emotions? I say that very carefully because emotional repression is the unconscious exclusion of painful or unwanted thoughts, memories, or emotions from our conscious awareness. This is distinctive from suppression, which is conscious effort. There is no awareness in repressive action. So those unspoken rules become inherited patterns. They create a ripple effect of repression to regulation. For the children of the silent generation, many baby boomers and early Gen Xers, they often grew up in households where emotional landscapes were quiet, perhaps even barren. They learned quickly that certain feelings were unwelcome or simply ignored. This can lead to what we call emotional illiteracy, not knowing how to identify, name, or effectively manage one's own feelings. Just imagine trying to navigate a complex world of relationships when you don't have the internal compass for your own emotional state. This often manifested as difficulty with intimacy. How do you form deep, vulnerable connections when you haven't seen it modeled or when you've learned that vulnerability is dangerous? It can lead to a fear of closeness, a tendency to avoid conflict rather than resolve it, or even a pattern of fineness where everything is always fine, even when it clearly isn't. Now let's look at later generations. For instance, the grandchildren of the silent generation, millennials and Gen Z. These individuals might not have directly experienced their wartime struggles, but they've inherited the echoes. If you fall within these generations, you might find that you struggle with emotional regulation. Maybe you swing between shutting down completely and having intense, overwhelming emotional outbursts because you never learned the middle ground for processing feelings. Or maybe you crave deep intimacy but also fear it. There's a strong desire for authentic connection today, yet there may be an underlying discomfort with true emotional vulnerability that can stem from these inherited patterns. Alternatively, you can communicate indirectly. We might hint at our feelings or hope others will intuit them rather than stating them clearly, because direct emotional expression feels foreign or unsafe. Or perhaps you feel perpetually anxious or overwhelmed. When emotions aren't processed, they don't just disappear. They often manifest as anxiety, stress, or even physical symptoms. It's crucial to understand that this isn't about blaming. These people in our lineage, our grandparents and great grandparents, did their absolute best with the tools they had. They were resilient survivors. But understanding why certain emotional patterns exist within our families can be incredibly liberating. It shifts the narrative from what's wrong with me to this makes sense given my family's history. The good news is awareness is the first step towards healing the echoes. If you recognize these patterns in yourself or your family, here are a few thoughts. One, cultivate emotional literacy. Start by naming your feelings. Look up emotional vocabulary if you need help naming things. The more you can name it, the more you can tame it. Two, practice vulnerability. You don't have to spill your guts to everyone. Start small. Share one honest, slightly uncomfortable feeling and just see what happens. Three, Consider chatting with AI or going to therapy. Having a sounding board can be helpful in unpacking these inherited patterns, helping you develop new ways to relate to your emotions and others. This practice can guide you in building the emotional muscle that might have been underdeveloped in your family line. 4, practice self-compassion. This isn't your fault. You're working with the cards you were dealt. Be kind to yourself as you learn and you grow, and think about what you can work on as you engage with younger generations. And 5, engage in intergenerational dialogue. If it feels okay, try to have curious conversations with your older relatives. Ask them about their childhoods, their experiences. You might gain incredible insight, not to interrogate them, but to understand the context that shaped them. By recognizing the emotional scars carried by the silent generation and how those scars have echoed through the generations, we can begin to heal. And we can choose to write a new emotional script for ourselves and for future generations. I hope this episode sparked some reflection and perhaps a deeper understanding of the unspoken legacies within your own family. By understanding the intricate patterns that shape us, we can awaken to greater awareness, cultivate compassion for ourselves and others, and live with more truth. Thank you for joining me on Not So Perfect. Together, we're embracing our humanity, inviting healing, growth, and deeper connection. Until next time, keep exploring your not so perfect journey with an open heart.